Well, good morning, everybody. That's a little promo for our next camp in March next year. So we hope to have everybody along. Thank you to Tasmania for inviting us down. Gillian Critchley and myself are the co-organisers of the camp. As Marilyn just told you, we've been around for about 7 years now, and in that time we've had 40 Australians and 1 New Zealander come to the camp, and no Tasmanians, unfortunately, so we'd really love to see a Tasmanian child come to the camp. The idea was germinated from an article in the UK CMT magazine, and we are the second CMT kids camp in the world after the UK. And in fact, after we started, the US has now started a week-long camp, generally held on the East Coast. We're going to just cover our philosophy briefly. We'll talk a little bit more about the CMT kid camps. We've got 2 CMT kids with us today to talk to you about our exciting trip to the UK we had in July this year, and then we're going to show you a little bit of a taste of that trip. So I'll pass on to Gillian.
So really part of our philosophy as adults working with kids, so I should point out Peter has CMT, and so both of our daughters inherited CMT 1A from Peter. So I suppose we've always been very proactive about helping them learn about their own CMT and managing. So that philosophy then developed into the CMT Aussie Kids philosophy, which is really giving kids a safe environment to be able to get self-confidence, self-awareness, actually being able to manage their CMT without that threat of being with people that don't sort of kind of get what CMT is. Youth with CMT helping each other, learning to manage it, but also talking to each other. We don't sit there and have deep and meaningful conversations about CMT on camp. We get on and we do stuff, but it's the time when they're in their downtime, when they're having a bit of a chat, and yeah, we talk about our orthotics, or did you do the fast trial with Josh, or stuff like that comes up, and it just makes them not feel so alone, and that's one of our main philosophies. Everyone's got something to share, and everyone's got something to learn as well, and to do that. We also closely manage social media, as you would be aware. If you're under the age of 40, social media is quite a strong communicator, and it works really well with our kids. So we do have a closed page, CMT Aussie Kids closed page, which is open to kids or their parents if their kids don't have a Facebook profile. And a lot of that interaction happens on that closed Facebook page. The question a lot of people say is, and I suppose many of you are sitting here now going, well, I'm 82. I heard a gentleman over here say, you know, what can I do for Aussie Kids, or what point is there in having Aussie Kids? Part of it is developing that, managing my CMT, and I think it's great that we followed on from Josh, because what Josh is talking about is getting them early, paediatrically, getting them the enthusiasm. Depression is quite a strong thing, and we know that we have many kids that we keep on camp who are actually clinically depressed, but the camp gives them something to give them hope, to make them feel like they're not alone. 100% of our donations, this is the plug, 100% of our donations go straight back to the kids. That's just hold that thought, because if you donate to any other organisation, there's always going to be an administrative cut. That doesn't happen with the kids, it goes straight back to the kids. So I will plug our fundraising later on. Our hope would be that we do find a Tasmanian kid, because we are doing a fundraiser today.
So this year, Gillian and I took, excuse me, I took 9 CMT youth to the UK for their camp. We've had a very strong relationship with our counterpart, Karen Rogers, in the UK, and she's been organising kids camps for well over 15 years. And in 2016, she brought 5 kids and 5 leaders to visit us in Sydney, and we took them down to Berry, and we had 2 extra weeks where we showed them throughout Sydney and out to the Blue Mountains. And in November in 2016, we opened applications for our own UK trip. Each applicant. So this wasn't, you know, guys, let's put our hands up and go. It wasn't like that. Each applicant had to demonstrate how they would raise the $6,000 that we needed to go for the trip. That's $6,000 each. No bank of mum and dad. And they needed also, while they were raising those funds, to raise awareness of CMT. So it wasn't just getting out there in public and getting the funding, they had to raise awareness of CMT. And they also had to tell us how they were going to contribute to the team as we travelled to the other side of the world. So it was a very important thing, and we had some really fantastic entries. Sarah, who you see very shortly, she took photos of her feet in all types of places, from Deniliquin through to Sydney and under the Harbour Bridge, everywhere. And she was just a delight to have along to our camp. So I'm going to tease you first by getting Eleanor and Sarah up here to talk about the camp and why it was important for them. Then we're actually going to show you a video of the camp, and the trip itself. So Sarah and Eleanor, welcome up.
Sorry, I just have to get my little speech ready. I wasn't really ready. Sorry, I wrote it on the plane trip down. So you've just heard that the last July that we just had 9 kids and 2 adults from Australia. We all rocked up to the UK for a time of a lifetime. And while over there, we saw many new things. We made some great new friends and noticed some strange cultural differences. Knowing the close relationship between Australia and England, except in the cricket, we were expecting a country pretty similar to our own, just a bit colder. However, what we were met with was tiny cultural differences that left us confused in the most minuscule ways. We are here to tell you about what we did, who we met, and what we noticed. Firstly, and most notably, our meetings were often confused with other things. Maddie, Sarah, Awen and I were sitting in a group with one of our older UK mentors, Nathaniel. We were squashed on a hammock when he remarked, "You guys don't really get along, do you?" We were really confused. He elaborated, "You Australian kids, you guys are always calling each other names and picking on each other." That got a laugh out of us. It was here when we realised that the strange looks we were getting from our UK friends when we called each other silly buggers and other names was because they thought we were seriously being mean to each other. But for us, they were just terms of endearment. Needless to say, when we explained our difference in culture, the UK kids were much happier to be called dopey dingoes than before. My big sister, Matilda, who's currently off being important and couldn't make it today, is a person I look up to. Until on camp, suddenly I was looking down at her, in a wheelchair. She had decided it would be a fantastic idea to dislocate her knee 2/3 up a rock climbing wall and was wheelchair bound for 2 days. Surrounded by 40-ish other kids at the camp with CMT, you can imagine how much sympathy she got. Not. Talk about a dopey dingo. Luckily, this was the only injury we had on the whole trip. Halfway through our trip, we stopped in the Black Country. We stayed in Malvern at a newly rebuilt recreation centre. It was much like Berry Sport and Rec Centre, where we've had our Australian camp before. The most exciting thing, however, was the amount of space this place had. We'd just come from London. There were so many rooms, and as we all found out, they had a large open space out the back. This was our last stop before camp, and we were enjoying a bit of relaxing before the energy of camp. There was a huge field filled with grass as tall as us. I'm talking tall grass. And we organised a huge hide-and-seek game. People hid behind trees, archery targets, and rocks. Most shockingly to us Australians was when, after not being able to find Tulare for 15 minutes, we called her out. To our surprise, she had laid amongst the grass. As she emerged, we all freaked out. How could she lay there in the grass? There's snakes there. They could have bitten her. She reminded us it was England. There were no snakes. On our second day in England, we caught the train to the seaside town Brighton. The weather was fantastic, and we were all excited to see the famous Brighton Pier and what beaches those pommies had to offer for us. There we met up with some of our UK kids who lived in the area. We went through the pier arcade and attraction before lunch, and then a couple of us decided we would go for a swim. At this particular beach, and like many others across the UK, it was sand instead of pebbles. If you've never been on a beach with pebbles, I have some short advice for you. Don't. The pain of walking on thousands of round pebbles is not one I ever want to relive again. As you would guess, spending 2 weeks with people, you tend to grow as friends. I'm sure you've heard the saying, age is just a number, but on this trip, it had become a reality. With ages ranging from Sarah, our youngest at 14, and Matilda, our oldest at 20, things could have become difficult, but they didn't. Some of our UK kids were the ones that blended in the most. Most notably, Nathaniel, one of the mentors from the UK. He was around 10 years older than most of us, but he was a kid at heart, and by the third day, he had made a place in our hearts, and we jokingly called him Dad. Enough for him to message us on Father's Day and ask where his card was. The other mentor, Sophie, was much like a mum, a worrying, protective, but overall loving and kind mum. And this dynamic duo became our substitute mum and dad while on the trip. Of course, we had Peter and Gillian and Karen and Kev, but Nathaniel and Sophie were the sort of substitute parents who would sneak chocolates or make sure we had found the exact souvenir we were looking for. Another bond we formed was with CMT UK kid, to Larry, who joined us on our trip just before camp and followed us until Edinburgh. We had first met Larry when the UK kids had come over for the camp 2 years before. Larry was just a bit older than me, and as a result, we often shared a room, along with my cousin Maddie. She was a quiet roommate, and although we chatted heaps, it was only the end of the trip when we asked if she hadn't liked us sharing a room with her, as she had always been quiet and subdued. She laughed and told us that she was instead quiet because she couldn't get a word in with us loud Australians. We were there, however, for one reason, the CMT UK Kids Camp. It was held in the Lakes District at a campsite especially made for disabled kids. The activities were fun and adventurous and gave us a chance to experience things we generally don't. They offered things such as modified cycling, rock climbing and abseiling, gill scrambling, bushcraft, and most excitingly for me, canoeing. The canoeing was on the lake of the Lake District, with mountains rising around us. We worked as a team to paddle across the lake, where we stopped and had morning tea in the sun. Surprising in England. On our return, we were allowed to go swimming in the lake. A couple of us jumped in the freezing water. Surrounded by mountains and bush, and after a great weekend, swimming in this lake was one of my best memories of the trip. The nights on the camp were always filled with fun. After a swim in the pool and a bit of dinner, the party always started. After a weekend of adventurous activities, one would normally be in bed early, but this was our moment to socialise and hang out while not hanging off a wall or in a harness. On our last night, I think I, along with some others, got about 3 hours sleep. We didn't want to miss a moment. It was so important and special to us to have this weekend and this time together, to be with people who understand and to be open about everything. Most of all, what I'm sure we all enjoyed most was the fun and friendship we made over there. Here we were, a ragtag bunch of kids from as far wide as Yass to Townsville, with different lives, different ages and different interests. But we all had one thing in common, CMT. As you know, CMT sucks, but after a trip like this and the memories I made with some of my now closest friends, I think I can deal with CMT for a little longer.
So there you have it, guys. That's why Jill and I do CMT Aussie Kids. So the support for our trip was overwhelming. So Sarah and her grandmother, you could put your hand up, please, Denise, and her mother, they raised $15,000 for the trip. And John too, obviously. Sorry, John. As I said earlier, it was only $6,000 to the trip, so the rest went to research. So that's amazing. It's not just raising money for the kids for the trip, they raise money for research as well. Another little story I wanted to tell you about, because it'll be important in a minute. You'll see why. After hearing of our story, a lovely Torres Strait Islander lady who I had a relationship through at work, a business relationship, she offered to supply not only a hoodie for all of the travellers, but also a backpack. And she designed a special logo for us. And you can see the logo down here, and Eleanor's just fashioning that now. I'm going to read out that logo and the reason for it. It's called the Lobaru Promise, which means tomorrow's promise in the Miriam-Mer language from Mer Island. So it's exactly the same island where Eddie Mabo came from. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, for tens of thousands of years, used art to remind us how to navigate pathways, build connections, and teach us about relationships. Our life takes many twists and turns during this marvellous journey, which is depicted in the dots. It is the connections that are important, whether it is just next door or round the world. Our hopes and dreams are carried on the thermals of wind, on the crests of waves on the ocean, and along the peaks and ridges of the mountains. This journey is never ending, and nothing is for certain except for the importance of feeling supported as we experience life to its fullest, sharing a global message of peace, love, and respect. So look out for the Lobaru Promise in our video. I'm just going to start that in a minute, and please enjoy. Well, don't you? Thank you. Well, don't you wish you had that experience growing up with CMT? Please come and visit our display over lunch if you've got any questions. Our two CMT youth will be only too happy to answer those. Come and share the joy, and just remember, please, we need your support to keep doing that, and we've got some very generous sponsors here, particularly over the back there, a lovely lady who's given us a heap of support, both financial and backing. And please keep it up, and let's hopefully get a Tassie up to our next camp in March next year. Thank you.